glad to have you all here today to talk about this incredible film, which I've just watched 2 times back to back. This film is so technically sophisticated. I'm just wondering, since I have the three of you here, how do you begin with a film like this to all get on the same page creatively? Does it start with you, Aaron, sort of bringing everybody in and laying out what your ideas for the visual aspects of the film are?
Yeah, it was apparent from when you read the script or you watch the movie, you'll notice that the film doesn't really live in the dialogue. The dialogue sets the tone and the sort of procedural environment that we've put the audience in. But most of the story lies in the tactical dilemmas and the moral dilemmas and the when I say tactical dilemmas, I mean the battles that are going on around Captain Krause and the situational conflicts and dilemmas that he faces. So on the one hand, it was going to be a very subjective character study for a very interesting man. It was also very much about what was going on, and describing what's going on in a oceanic environment is a challenge. So, we set about defining our world, the virtual world that was going to take place out all those portal windows that you saw. And then we went down to North Carolina, right, Shelly? And we shot the side of the story where Tom is engaged emotionally with what's going on. Then we came back into post-production on the visual effects side and filled that out and married the two together.
I'm wondering for you, Julie, you had told me, that nobody understood why you wanted to take a film to design costumes for that was mostly uniforms, but you thought otherwise. Do you want to talk about that?
I do, and I will try and keep it brief, which is extremely difficult for me. And Shelly, I just want to say I could have saved a great deal of money on shoes. If I had known how this film would have ended up. But nonetheless, moving forward.
Don't anybody believe that, by the way. Don't anybody believe that. Even if Julie knew the shoes were never going to be on screen, she would have put like 150% thought into the shoes.
Yes, it's called Shoes in a Headshot. Nonetheless, I believe that when you read a script, you're attracted to the script. Who's going to do it? Who's going to be in it? What is its worth? As a costume designer, I would like to be part of a company. And yes, uniform means uniformity, all the same. But I've never believed in the word same. I believe that you read a script and you begin that script for what is on that page, what is between those words. And you design that for what is there, not what is going to end up on that screen. And a uniform is far more than what is tucked in and what is untucked. It's the pride of how a person wears it. It's at that time in 1942, yes, you would have your hierarchy. You would have someone like Tom Hanks, Captain Krause, someone who has worked 20 years to have this commission, who wears that uniform with pride, who gets to pick that coat, that leather jacket that we went through many machinations, many manifestations, one of which he thought looked like a 70s pimp jacket. Unfortunately, where I went in the other room and cried because it was my favorite. Nonetheless, I probably shouldn't have said this. Boy, I wish that wasn't live. But nonetheless, what we ended up with, and Aaron, you wanted that short jacket, which I didn't care for, but the one we ended up with was one that by the time that Tom Hanks, that Krause, and when they became that same person, hopefully that coat, that jacket, that was his own. That leather, that collar, that was his own. The pockets, that he chose not to wear gloves, that his hands bled, that was his. When he wore the blues, when he stood there at Cleveland's funeral, when you read that story between the two of them, Cleveland played so extraordinary by Rob Morgan. When I read that, I knew I had to be part of this story. This is still happening. You're good enough to be below deck and cook, but you stay there. But when it comes time to kill, when you wear that battlement, those clothes over white, cooking over those clothes that you cook in, that you make the meals in, that you serve up on the upstairs quarters, when you serve that and you put that armor over there and you see that blood and you die. So you go in general quarters and you see that, and that's it. When Cleveland's coffin falls, that is beyond the uniform. That's beyond it. And just two more. In those first pages, there are these characters. There's Flusser, and I'm trying to think of the other name. There's Flusser for my two favorites, and I'm just thinking of who is it. It starts with an S. I'm getting so excited. I'm forgetting. I think it's Stanton. I'm not sure. You think of these people and you think of their clothes that they're in at that time, which is very similar to now. I'm hurrying. You shouldn't have asked me first. The problem is at that time, Levi's were making uniforms, and uniforms were coming from World War I. They were coming from everywhere. And people, these sailors, they were drawing on the backs of their uniforms. And when Hanks slash Krause, they became the same person. In that mirror, at that fitting, that moment when they become the same person, that's why you're the costume designer. I say that over and over again, and we haven't even got to Evelyn. The wonderful, the period costumes, when he stands up straight and she sees him in the uniform, and the marriage still doesn't work when he thinks she'll see him at that prime. There are so many moments for costume designers, for all of us together, because we are trained to do everything. The story first. And Shelly, I'm so close to you. You had the grays, you had the colors, you have the tones. And Shelly knows big and little, to know big and little. And Aaron and I have worked together before. And Aaron comes to me early. He says, read this, Julie. And he lets me talk, and he lets me draw, and he lets me go off the page, and he lets me change my mind, and he lets me on the set, and he lets me climb up to the top on the ladder, and then I don't know how to get down. And Tom Hanks, he lets me touch him. He lets me pull down even though he has a dresser, and he is accessible. And to work with somebody who writes that script, and he has his own pictures in mind, and yet he understands the pink pearl eraser for the costume designer. That's gold. We had a company, and I'd do it again. Uh-oh, I talked too much.
Well,
I did it.
Thank you, Julie. I just think
you could have interrupted.
I'll interrupt you now, but I didn't, because I wanted to hear all that, and I love to hear the passion that you bring to your projects. It's no surprise to me now that you've made so many incredible films. So thank you so much for talking about your vision of these costumes. Also, I want to say I was actually surprised. The soldiers, despite wearing they actually were wearing a lot of different kinds of outfits, which I was fascinated by. There's different variations in all their outfits, and I really, really appreciated that, because a different person would all they each would wear their own clothes differently, but they were
No, but
also,
you have to respect, excuse me, you have to respect the rank. You must respect
Right.
the rank. And we did have advisors. To respect the rank is so important because you earn those ranks. And we did have advisors there. A costume designer must respect that. And we are here to design and not to change what people have earned. That is something that is there just as the words are, and we respect the director and the actor, and there are crews there. So that's so important to say. The uniform is there for a reason.
yeah. So Shelly, this is a film that could have looked extremely gray. We're out on the ocean. It's inclement weather, rainy, dark. But it's actually a lot of varied lighting situations going on. I liked one thing in particular. It's in the nighttime and they're on the bridge and there's this red glow going on inside. How do you do things like that? Do you just research all the instruments and what type of light they emit to like sort of create these situations?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of tracking the light across kind of the stormy atmosphere that they were in, which is, at first glance, you might think, okay, this is going to be rather plain light that this whole story is going to be told under. But when you really think about it, they're crossing the Atlantic, so they're covering a large amount of distance, and there's 3 days and 2 nights. So I can actually help almost with the script structure in a way, because Tom had kind of written the script across these 4-hour watches. The way that the crew works on a destroyer is every 4 hours they change the crew out. In fact, that was one of the kind of important notes in the film, was to see this constant change of these younger faces and have Tom be the consistent force inside that pilot house. So with those different shifts that came through, I kind of designed different times a day, kind of gave each one its own, sort of look. And, a dusk on one day is different than a dusk on another day. A dawn is different than another dawn. And, nights kind of had their own special thing. And yeah, like a costume designer or a director, you break down the whole script, you kind of track it all through. And I think that what's different about these types of films that had so many of the backgrounds that were going to be added later was that sort of had to be conceived at the same time. Whatever lighting I was putting in the foreground needed to somehow coalesce with what was going to end up in the background, and that communication needed to start during pre-production. That whole discussion about what our end goal was, which was really the fun part. So there's a lot of kind of this conception stage that goes through it, and in terms of the actual fixtures, we were very fortunate to be shooting in Baton Rouge, and where there's this fantastic museum ship, this Fletcher class destroyer that's completely restored in its World War II configuration. So all we had to do was walk around that ship, and you could see all the period lighting that was there, everything they had. And so my cues were right in front of me, and you could study the light on the ship. Even though we shot very little on the ship, we shot for 5 days, on our unit, and second unit did some more additional work on the deck there. But we shot mostly on stage. But my goal was definitely to take that kind of naturalism, the way the light falls in that very natural way on that ship and against those metallic surfaces, into the stage, and make it very much the opposite of a Hollywood lighting job, and make it look a lot more atmospheric and a lot more experiential.
This talking about this movie is I was thinking about this when I was getting ready today. I've actually been on a U-boat several times because I grew up close to Chicago, and there's one permanently parked.
Right.
Did you go to it at the Museum of Science and Industry?
No, but I know I've seen it from the outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
It's it's fascinating how claustrophobic it is getting on one of those things. It's crazy. Yeah. So for you, Aaron, How do you? One of the most fascinating things about this movie is sort of the choreography of these men. The movie feels like you're real time watching a battle. And one of the most fascinating things is watching these guys pack a ton of them into a really small space and fight a battle. Did that require like rehearsals, really specific blocking and rehearsals to get all of that coordinated with all the actors?
Yeah. The first step, in terms of the choreography and the blocking, the first step was that all the actors spent, I think, close to a week with Dale Dye, who's famous for his sort of pre-production boot camps in any given genre of the war. In for Saving Private Ryan, he took the cast out for a week and fed him cans of beans and made him sleep in the grass. And his goal being to imbue the cast with a sense of sense memory of what it's like to sleep in the mud or to be worried about what's over the hill. Not that you could ever really recreate that sense, but you give an actor enough of it so that they have something to call on. And in that regard, Dale spent a week or so with the actors on a ship, sleeping in the bunks. The museum ship actually has a program where Boy Scouts or classes or whomever can sleep over on the ship and get a feeling for what it was like. And so Dale took that to the extreme and woke them up in the morning. And there's stories about how guys, sat up too quickly in bed and cut their head open on a rafter. And so he gave this experience to the actors and also taught them how to get to general quarters, taught the actors in the pilot house that you're talking about, how the chain of command works. Some of the procedural dialogue in the film is in the screenplay, enough of it to give you a sense of it and a tempo for it. But if you'd included all of that dialogue in the screenplay, it'd be 200 pages long because, as you can see, it goes down one direction, comes back the other. And so rather than script it out word for word, the guys on the bridge were taught that if you get this kind of command from the captain, this is how you're going to respond. So in a sense, they didn't even have to turn to their scripts for some of that dialogue to bring the bridge to life. And then in terms of where they were standing, they all have a duty. They all have a post. The talker's plugged into the wall so that he can send his message this way. And there's one plug there and there's one plug there. And the helm has to stand at the helm, and the lee helmsman has to stand at the engine crank. And so slowly, as you can kind of see, all of the canvas starts to establish itself for you. Here's where they have to be. Here's how it has to work, right? And then my job, once I've established that environment, is to just simply take the virtual, battle that's happening outside, right? And stage the scene in such a manner that Tom is looking out the right portal, or he's heading out to the right bridge wing, and engaging emotionally with what is happening yet is not happening on the set, so that we could create the subjective side of what was later going to be a live action versus visual effects film. Actors talk about, we've all heard those moments in interviews where actors they get asked, what was it like, acting to a green screen instead of a dinosaur? And they all have, different thoughts on how to do that. And in most films, that's a novelty. There was that one scene where I had to pretend the creature was there and it wasn't. But Greyhound was, from beginning to end, all of these actors and Tom in the lead, trying to create a human and emotional engagement with something that just wasn't out there. If you felt engaged with how, if you were engaged with how Tom was, or Krause in this case, was feeling about each of these moments, these dilemmas, the explosion, the loss of life a mile away, you know, inside the flames, if that connected with you, that was Tom building a performance from his imagination, with the help of me, you know,
Right.
standing there with an iPad saying, here's what's going on. And
Right.
here are the 3 or 4 beats that are emotionally significant that we should talk about, you know, evoking.
Right.
May I just say something
Sure.
quickly? What Dale did, and with the help of Aaron and Tom, it's very rare that for a costume designer with this lead time that you can come and you'll actually have actors besides your principals that will have sense memory, and you'll see costumes that already have marks of aging because they have been out there. So that's a gold mine. You'll see them, they've been lived in. You'll see the marks that of death to come, of the grease to come. It's almost like a numbered oil painting. So what Dale was able to do, and he was there every day for someone like myself, is that he was always accessible. But this week that he gave was quite helpful. It truly was, when these such young sailors came back, and you were reminded of the age of these young men in this war.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
young.
Absolutely. Actually, that was one of the things that I noticed right away is the difference in the age between Tom Hanks and most of the rest of the soldiers. You know, they look like high school boys, and in these uniforms, like, it's striking. It's so striking, and it reminds you that, oh yeah, wars are fought by these young people. This ship is virtually being run by all these young people, and a war fought by, and I have to say, something feels inappropriate about it, and that was probably my own take on it. You know, not anything that you guys did, but it feels in a way a commentary, or just sort of a, please remember this before you engage in a war. This is going to fight. This is who's going to fight in it. It's all your young people. So
Early death, inappropriately early death. The theft.
I wanted to ask, Aaron, when did you sign on to do this? It was a few years ago, right? Because you said in an article I read that you agreed to do it, but then Tom Hanks went off to do the post. So it's been a few years since you started working on this, right?
Yeah, you know, when movies come to life, they come to life with a rhythm, and they have to, and we'd gotten the movie sort of started, and then the post came up, and it was something that Tom really wanted to do, but which was fine with me because it gave me a little more prep time, and I was able to live with the film and the story and the research a little bit longer. But yeah, in terms of how it came to life, it was basically a script that found its way to me through my agent, and then I met with Tom, and I had sent an email to my agent that made its way up to Tom's agent, which got read to him over the phone, and I was very effusive about what I thought the film could be, and that made it to Tom, and he says, "Hey, cool. Sounds like he digs it. Let's sit down." And that's when I went in and I sat down with Tom, and we just talked. Actually, Shelly. We talked a lot about cinematographers. I was plugging him for his experience with working with Gordon Willis on The Money Trap, no less, right?
Yeah, right.
And in fact, Tom tells this story about how Gordon Willis photographed The Godfather for our audience, and Money Trap was I think a romantic comedy. And Tom had asked Gordon, Gordon, what do you shot The Godfather? What are you doing here? Right? To which Gordon apparently answered, hey, comedies need good lighting too. Which I love, right?
Yes, they do.
So,
Are you talking about The Money Pit?
The Money Pit.
Money Pit. I love that movie. I love it.
Yeah.
It's great.
And of course, talked to him about working with Conrad Hall on Road to Perdition, who was my hero and mentor, coming out of USC Film School as a DP. And we just hit it off as filmmakers. We seemed like we'd like the same things. Before you know it, he said, come in and meet Gary Getzman, my production partner. And we just suddenly were making a movie together. And Film Nation came on board to finance, and then Sony heard about the project and said, we'll take the rights. And we were off to the races.
I feel like you can see when you watch the film how much research and how much work was put into the specificity of everything. And because of the specificity of it, I personally came to so many realizations watching this. The technology, if you will, of this time period feels so primitive that I was shocked that they made it across. I was like, how did they win based on this like primitive sonar and this the code breaking and it all? These were all things that I just had no idea about, and at the end I was so surprised that we won. I was like, I can't believe the United States actually won.
Well, this was the challenge. It's an unusual film and somewhat experimental in that it's more so than I think many films, or at least many war films. I'm really glad to hear you say that you were engaged with that the fact that it was hard to use these machines means that Shelly and I, everyone else, did their jobs, because the film, Tom described the film as the perfect 90-minute procedural. And the idea was to just show you how it worked and how it went down and how hard it was, and let that speak for itself dramatically, so that instead of someone talking about their girl back home or, dying on the battlefield, with last words, some of these things we're used to seeing in war films, soliloquies about war. The idea here was to just show the hard work, show the coordination, the talent, the how hard it was to find a sub with a piece, with sonar. How hard it was to get the word from this part of the ship to the other part of the ship, and how a sneeze, could mean the difference between life or death. Movies don't typically make, big narrative turns or build tension and on a sneeze. But that's what this film was. And of course, a sneeze doesn't work as a tension builder until the line of communication has been so well established as a metronome and with a rhythm that a sneeze interrupting that rhythm becomes meaningful to an audience in the middle of a sub hunt, right? So this was the challenge, and I turned to Shelly quite a lot, especially in pre-production, because I knew that what you typically use as raw materials on a shot-by-shot basis when you're trying to find the story was different. If you walked into this film, 2 days before it was time to shoot it, you would fail miserably, because you have to understand the way the ship works. You have to be a mini expert yourself before you can actually stand shoulder to shoulder as a director and cinematographer and say, here's what's going on, here's where the drama is, and here's how we're going to build this so that a sneeze becomes interesting as a tension builder.
Right.
And so I'd asked Shelly very early on to engage, really get to know the world, so that, and the fact that you've said that the world interested you, that the world and its limitations engaged you and was part of the experience, means, we might have done our jobs well enough.
No, I mean, I absolutely felt like I was really there on that bridge with them. It was crazy, and it's a very immersive experience watching that film. I would actually love to see it in a theater one day.
Yeah.
Speaking of, when you knew you were not going to be releasing in the theater because of COVID, had you already been talking to Apple Plus about using that platform to release, or was that many conversations with many people?
No, it was a complete left turn. The film was slated for June 13th, and there's still a trailer on the web, I think, with talking about our release date. Sony was going to put it in the theaters June 13th, and then of course came the pandemic and all the bottleneck of films and everything pushing downstream. And then the issue was that when the doors finally swing open, and they will, and the theaters open, and they will, everyone's going to rush in like Black Friday, Thanksgiving sales, right? And everyone's going to be grabbing. And Greyhound had tested really well, and there was a lot of demand based on the trailer to see the film, but it needed to live on the right weekend so that it could, these days, if you make a mid-budget adult drama, you have to be very careful about where you place it relative to all these monstrous tentpoles. And without knowing where those films were going to land, Greyhound was sitting there kind of wondering what its future would be. And that's apparently when the creative idea of going to Apple came about. And given what a rare commodity audiences are these days, I think Tom and I were both grateful that the film was finally going to be able to share the film. Were we disappointed that we didn't get to see it on the big screen? Sure. But that doesn't have anything to do with our feelings towards Apple. And we're lucky to have an audience. The world is very different today than it was 3 months ago.
So let's see if we have any questions from the audience. Oh, Julie got a compliment. Says not a question, but a comment. Julie is wonderful. I'm a screenwriter, so I love how much she connects with the scripts.
See,
That's
Julie.
for you, Julie.
Julie, you were.
Thank you.
Julie, you were worried that no one would ask a costume question, and you got the first one.
Well, there you go. Well, I appreciate that very, very much.
Okay, so somebody wants to know for Aaron, what's it like to direct versus being a cinematographer?
Well, for me, it's the same. It's very much the same toolbox, at least on set. In between jobs, it's a completely different world. As a cinematographer, right, Shelly? When the phone rings, there's a movie to make.
Yeah.
Someone's actually making a movie. As a director, when the phone rings, it's someone talking about trying to make a movie.
Right.
Very different dynamic in between gigs. But on set, it's the same. I think it's the same toolbox. I never really. Everyone would say, "Oh, it's not about the camera anymore. When you direct, it's about actors and performances." And I'm like, okay, but it seems to me that it's about looking at the shot and watching everything and asking yourself, is it working? which I always used to do as a DP. I wasn't blind to the performance as a cinematographer. I wanted the whole image and the whole dramatic. You're building a movie piece by piece, and I'm just as legitimate an audience member standing at the monitor as a DP as I am as a director. And so when you move over to you're using the same toolbox. You're looking at is the shot working? Is the camera telling the story? Does the actor seem truthful? And if not, cut. And what do we have to fix? So you know what I mean? Like, yes, I had something to say directly to actors about making this shot feel right, but everything else I'd been doing before that, you would turn to a director and say, did that feel right? No, not. So I don't know. Shelly, maybe you can comment on that. The similarities between cinematography and directing they're not as far apart as I think people think.
I have a comment. I'll just say what I picture a director's job as is what Tom Hanks's job was on Greyhound, which is being asked a question every 30 seconds and having to have the answer like now. Like, okay, do this, do that.
Or pretending to have the answer.
Yes. Shelly's like, I'm just glad I'm not a director, guys. Shelly, the questions for you, what would you say was the most difficult part of the movie to film?
Sort of what Aaron touched on is making each shot speak. I mean, the film is obviously very technical, both in a historical sense and in a kind of a modern sense with visual effects and all that. And what became kind of a constant endeavor was placing yourself back in the narrative again. In this world, get yourself back to telling a story. And for me, because this was more or less an experience of the audience being dropped into a situation where they need to learn the language. They're standing next to the captain and they're asking themselves the question, would I crack under this same type of pressure, this relentless pressure, when what I'm doing, I'm not sure it's right, so to me, that manifested in camera performance and making sure the cameras were doing the right thing. All of our cameras were handheld. So the operators were very participatory with the actors, studied the script, listened to what Aaron was saying during between takes, so that we could kind of understand the moments that were needed and how that I can assist visually to help that, either with a little glint of light in the eye or getting the camera in the right place, little adjustments. Of course, because we were handheld, we were constantly maneuverable and very flexible. And that was the reason why, because you're constantly kind of sussing out kind of the truth of the scene in doing so.
Julie, somebody wanted to ask about your approach to designing costumes for this film as opposed to a film that you did that was set in the future, like 12 Monkeys.
Well, I think that what one has to understand for a costume designer, you begin always with the script and why does this person get dressed? Who do they get dressed for? What is their vulnerability? Where is the practical? Is it cold? What are the seasons? 12 Monkeys was different. Working with Terry Gilliam, I loved working with Terry Gilliam. It is great to work with directors who write. Aaron writes. I tend to I enjoy working with writer directors. And if they, so 12 Monkeys, I firmly believe the future's already here. Something like 12 Monkeys, we look around and we see that 12 Monkeys can be a contemporary script. Those of you who've seen it, it's happening right now. So the approach for 12 Monkeys is still the same. There are many stories with 12 Monkeys. It doesn't have to do with this. There's one I'll tell you very quickly, and then you'll understand that my approach is usually the same. You look at that script. You figure out, who are these characters? Why do they get up in the morning? The character of Tom Hanks, he finally got his commission. Krauss got his commission. His heart, his brain, they merged. He had another chance. Maybe his relationship could happen again. He wore that uniform with pride. That pride and that belief and his spirituality and his knowledge of equality, those things, his knowledge of equality made that part of him a contemporary man. There were parts of him that were an old-fashioned man. My type, if I'm answering this, my level of design, I will do anything. I will go where any type of script is, whether it's Frida, 12 Monkeys. I joined a Latino theater company that needed help. I will go where the words are. Theater, film, television, the street. I just want the words. But the point of the question is that watching Tom Hanks become that character in the mirror, that is why you are a costume designer. The moment in 12 Monkeys with Bruce Willis, with Terry Gilliam, the moment that I understood 12 Monkeys, I've told the story many times, it'll be very quick. It happened and I'll do this so fast, and I'm sorry, Aaron, I'm sorry, because it's 12 Monkeys and we're talking about this, but it has to do with being a costume designer. You be careful who you walk by, keep your eyes open all the time. The uniforms have been here since we began. And here it is, 12 Monkeys in the gynecologist's office, in the office, realizing that the doctor is wearing 2 pairs of rubber gloves. You say to the doctor, are you telling me that the first thing that the baby touches is plastic? It's a pair of rubber gloves. And the doctor says to you, yes, Julie, I'm afraid it is. And you call the costume house where your crew that you can't live without, and you say to them, seal everything, take away touch. And then you remember that moment when Tom Hanks' fingers are bleeding because he knows that he can still feel, and his feet are bleeding. That touch, no matter what happens with those elements and the scale of the world falling apart, that his soul and his blood and people are dying, and he's going to make it back, not knowing what he has done, what he has achieved, because he's still a one-on-one captain in a world where there are going to be millions of deaths.
Speaking of the when his feet were bleeding and he sends his messenger, all those moments, this will be my last question for Aaron, all those moments when he sends the messenger first to get the coat, then to get the gloves, then to get the slippers. I really like those moments, but for you, what do you think those moments bring to the movie? What do you think those moments add to the film?
Like the slippers and the gloves?
And his coat, and then he doesn't put the coat on until later.
Right. Well, there's a little story, there are little Easter egg stories everywhere in the film. It's not the volume of these things, the volume of some of the things Tom was doing in a screenplay is not cranked up very loud. they're like little grace notes that are meant to add up to one sort of bigger feeling. And what you're talking about there are little grace notes, like calling for his slippers is a practical solution to his feet, you know, that are aching, right? It's a practical solution to a problem. Here's a command dilemma. My feet hurt, you know, bring me my slippers. But then, of course, you know, what the shot does is it tilts down as the messenger hands them off, featuring the monogram, and it calls us back to where those slippers came from,
Right.
And that's by design. It's there, you know, it's there to remind you of the human side, to remind you of what's you know, of what he has back home. There might even be something romantic or comforting about, you know, your girlfriend's slippers in a moment like this. And it's ironic, and it's tonal. It's, you know, it's not in your face. It's just something for you to, oh yeah. Oh yeah, her. And oh my gosh. Right. And so, that's what those moments mean. They're just grace notes that are very subtly trying to evoke different feelings and ideas inside what is essentially a thrill ride, an experiential thrill ride.
Well, I thank you for that, and I thank you for all the moments, and I thank you, Shelly and Julie, as well. I have incredible admiration for the film crafts, and I love it when I get to talk to cinematographers and costume designers. And thank you just for all the amazing and specific amount of work that you put into this and all the research. It's such a tactile and sensual film to watch, and I know that takes a tremendous amount of time and work, and I really appreciate it. I think a lot of people do too. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Jim.
I know I went on, and I apologize for that. And I didn't mean to mention the stuff I worked on. I just get excited.
It's no problem at all.
And Aaron, thank you. And Shelly for letting me be part of this. And you know, for you to give us a chance to tell what happens, the technical part, it's rare. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate it very much. So thanks to all of you, and everybody take care.
Yep.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.